Do I know you?
Marcus, it's me.
I wanna be with you.
The air on the 54th floor of Thorne and Associates was a curated, temperature-controlled lie. It smelled of expensive air filtration systems and the faint metallic ghost of industrial toner. Marcus Thorne sat behind a desk crafted from a single slab of obsidian-stained oak. His deep-set dark eyes fixed on a digital rendering of a 60-story luxury tower in Midtown. He was back in his charcoal armor, a bespoke three-piece wool suit, a silver tie bar pinned with surgical precision, and a minimalist Patek Philippe watch that ticked with a rhythmic, cold indifference. To the world, the architect had returned. The board of directors had praised his remarkable resilience, viewing his trauma not as a tragedy, but as a cleansing fire that had burned away his recent unstable community interests. But inside, Marcus felt like a skyscraper with its interior walls demolished. He had the structural drawings of his life, the names, the dates, the professional milestones, but the rooms were empty. He remembered the name Julian as a tragic data point in his history, a man he had loved once. But when he looked at the name Elias Vance on his phone, he felt only a sharp, localized pain in his chest that he attributed to the healing bullet wound. He was a man of lines with no color to fill them, existing in a high-altitude glass box where the sun never felt warm. Elias Vance stood in the chrome and glass lobby of the firm, feeling like a vibrant, organic weed trying to push through a crack in a marble sidewalk. He was wearing a mustard yellow thrifted linen shirt. The sleeves rolled up to reveal his glowing medium dark brown skin and the beaded bracelets Marcus used to slide up and down his arms. His locks were tied back with a simple leather cord, but a few stray strands framed a face etched with the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. In his hand, he clutched a small brown paper bag, the scent of fresh rosemary oil and raw shea butter clinging to the fibers of the paper. "I have an appointment with Mr. Thorne," Elias told the receptionist. Her smile was as artificial as the silk orchids on her desk. She glanced at his clothes, the linen, the beads, the mud-stained boots, with a subtle professional disdain that Elias felt in his marrow. "Mr. Thorne is in a design review, Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice a polished, hollow chime. "He's been very clear that he is only seeing primary stakeholders and city officials today. If you have a community inquiry, I can direct you to our public relations liaison." "Tell him I'm the primary stakeholder of his soul," Elias said, his voice a low, vibrating chord of soul that seemed to startle the quiet of the lobby. "Tell him Elias is here. Tell him I'm not leaving until I see the man who's currently living in his skin." When the elevator doors hissed open on the 54th floor, Elias expected a scene. He expected a confrontation. What he got was worse: politeness. Marcus was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, hands clasped behind his back, silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline. When he turned, his face was a mask of elegant, terrifying neutrality. He looked at Elias not with hatred or love, but with the clinical curiosity one might show a complex blueprint they hadn't drafted. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice a smooth, hollow glass box. "My assistants informed me of your persistence. I appreciate the work you've been doing on the Harlem site. I've directed the firm to wire an additional $50,000 into the community trust for the soil remediation. I assume that is why you are here?" Elias stopped 5 feet away, The distance felt like 1,000 miles of frozen tundra. Marcus, look at me. Really look at me. Elias's warm brown eyes searched Marcus's face, looking for the man who had whispered, "I've got you in the mud." 3 weeks ago, you were holding my hand in a bathtub. You were telling me that I was your center. Now I'm a persistence to be managed. Marcus's brow furrowed, a tiny jagged crack appearing in the obsidian facade. I have seen the police reports, Elias. I have read the files Viv provided. I know we were involved, but I have the facts without the feeling. My brain can map the sequence of events, but the emotional data is missing. To me, you are a consultant I worked with on a difficult project. I cannot build a future on memories I don't possess. Elias stepped forward, ignoring the way Marcus instinctively stiffened, his shoulders becoming as rigid as a load-bearing beam. Elias reached into the paper bag and pulled out a bundle of dried rosemary, the leaves dark and fragrant. He also pulled out a small glass bottle of his signature musk and cedarwood cologne. "You used to say you liked the way I smelled," Elias whispered, his voice thick with a desperate, localized hope. "You said my scent was the only thing that could cut through the ambroxan and the ISO-E super you wear to hide your heart. You said rosemary reminded you of growth, and musk reminded you of the earth." Elias opened the bottle and waved it in the air between them. The sharp, earthy aroma hit the sterile, recycled air of the office like a lightning strike. Marcus's nostrils flared. His pupils dilated until the dark brown of his irises was almost swallowed by black. For a split second, his hand twitched, his fingers reaching toward the air near Elias's neck, a reflex from a ghost memory. I recognize the chemistry," Marcus rasped, his voice losing its corporate sheen for a heartbeat. "I can identify the notes, but it's just a smell, Elias. It's not a map back to you." He turned away, his jaw clenching so hard, it looked like a ridge of stone. "Please leave. I have a meeting with the zoning commission. I can't afford to be distracted by ghosts." Marcus sat back down after Elias left, his fingers flying across his keyboard with a frantic mechanical rhythm. He was trying to drown out the lingering scent of rosemary with the digital white noise of productivity. He opened the file for the Midtown Tower, focusing on the load-bearing calculations of the central core. He calculated the wind shear, the seismic dampers, the tensile strength of the glass. But the rosemary wouldn't leave his sinuses. It felt like a low-frequency hum in the back of his skull, an interference pattern that made his right angles look slightly crooked. He looked at a photo of Leo on his desk. The boy's sharp jawline, a perfect replica of his own. He felt a fierce biological protectiveness for the boy, a foundational instinct that amnesia couldn't touch. But whenever he looked at the man who was always in the background of the photos, Elias, he felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his chest that he attributed to the bullet wound. "It's just trauma," Marcus whispered, his voice echoing in the empty, high-ceilinged office. "Trauma is a structural failure of the narrative. I just need to rebuild the sequence. I don't need soul. I need order." Elias went back to Harlem and sat in the middle of the charred garden. He sat on a blackened timber beam, the mud of the salted earth staining his yellow linen pants. He felt like a man who had built a sanctuary only to realize he had forgotten to put a door in the plans. "He's gone, Mama," Elias told his mother that night, over a bowl of goat stew that tasted like ashes. They were in the new apartment Marcus had rented, a space that felt like a museum to a life that had ended before it began. "The man is there," The brain is there, but Marcus is gone. He looks at me like I'm a line of code he forgot to delete. Mama Vance didn't look up from her plate. She just took a sip of ginger beer and pointed a wooden spoon at him. He's not gone, Elias. He's just trapped under a fallen roof. You're an organizer, aren't you? You don't quit when the first community meeting fails. You look for a different entry point. You look for the thing that holds the whole structure together. I tried scent, Elias said. He recognized it, but he fought it. He's armored himself in logic. Then you use the anchor, Mama Vance said, her warm brown eyes glowing with ancestral wisdom. You use the boy, and you use the one thing the general and the amnesia can't touch. You use the North. The following day, Elias and Aunt Viv staged a legal and financial briefing at the Harlem apartment. They told Marcus's assistants that his physical presence was required to sign off on the insurance claims for the arson damage and to authorize the final excavation of the contaminated soil. Marcus, ever the meticulous senior partner, agreed to the site visit. When Marcus stepped out of his black luxury SUV in Harlem, he was hit by a wave of loud joy he had forgotten existed. Children were playing double dutch on the sidewalk. A local jazz saxophonist was practicing on a nearby stoop. The notes of a John Coltrane track drifting through the air. The smell of fried whiting and jasmine wafted from a nearby window. Marcus walked into the apartment with his leather briefcase, looking like a man who had accidentally landed on a foreign planet. He saw the high ceilings, the exposed brick, and the massive windows, but to him, they were just architectural features, a well-executed renovation. "Where are the documents?" Marcus asked, his voice cold and precise, his signature ESO-E superscent creating a clinical bubble around him. "The documents are with me, Dad," Leo said, stepping out from the kitchen. The boy wasn't wearing a tactical jacket or a sterling uniform today. He was in his favorite striped sweater and a pair of clean sneakers, his curls wild and free, catching the golden light of the Harlem afternoon. He was holding something behind his back, his expression watchful and solemn. Marcus's face softened instantly. The amnesia had wiped his romance, but his fatherhood was a foundation that went deeper than his memory. "Leo, you should be in school. What are you doing here?" "I took a mental health day," Leo said, using a phrase Elias had taught him. Elias says that sometimes the brain needs to stop working so the heart can start. He says you're stuck in a glass box in your head, and I have to help you find the door. Leo walked up to Marcus and grabbed his large, dark hand. He led him to the massive window overlooking the garden. "Do you remember what you told me about the compass, Dad? You said it always finds home because it's tethered to the north. You said north isn't a place, it's a feeling." Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out the vintage brass compass. He didn't just show it to Marcus, he pressed it firmly into Marcus's open palm, closing Marcus's long, calloused fingers over the cold, heavy metal. "You gave this to me to keep me safe," Leo whispered, his voice a tiny, vibrating frequency of truth. "Now I'm giving it back to keep you here. Please come home, Dad. I don't like the man in the charcoal suit. He doesn't know how to laugh." The moment Marcus's skin made contact with the worn, scratched brass, the Saturn Wall in his mind didn't just crack, it imploded. The weight of the object, the way it fit into the specific calluses of his hand, was a physical key turning in a rusted lock. The needle inside the compass began to spin wildly, caught in the magnetic interference of Marcus's sudden, violent adrenaline spike. The first memory hit like a falling steel beam. Marcus saw the clinical blue-white light of Julian's hospital room. He felt the cold, dry hand of his dying ex-lover on his head. He smelled the bleach and the stale despair of the VA hospital. He heard Julian's final, rattling breath. Let him be loud, Marcus. Don't build a glass box for him. Build a sanctuary. Find someone who can teach you how to grow things. Marcus gasped, his knees buckling. He grabbed the edge of a mahogany table to stay upright. The senior partner was being pushed out by the man who had promised to be a father. He felt the crushing weight of the secret he had kept for 7 years, the shame of his own cowardice, and the moment it had finally shattered in the light of Leo's eyes. The second memory was a surge of heat and salt. The scene shifted to the Dumbo rooftop fundraiser. He felt the humid New York wind on his face. He saw Elias Vance center stage, a storm of mustard yellow linen and loud joy. He felt the skepticism in his own chest, the arrogance of the architect, dissolving as Elias laughed. He heard the sound of the champagne flutes clinking. Then, the kiss, the taste of salt, champagne, and the rosemary oil in Elias's hair. The way Elias's locks felt against his cheek, soft and alive. The realization that for the first time in 35 years, Marcus didn't want to calculate the exit strategy. He wanted to inhabit the space. He felt the structural flaw of his own vulnerability becoming a load-bearing beam. He remembered the exact moment he realized that his blueprints were meaningless if they didn't have a soul to protect. The third memory was a scream of orange and black. The sound of the gunshot echoed in his head, a physical vibration that made his shoulder and chest ache with a phantom fire. He saw the general's cold, demonic face illuminated by the flames of the burning timber. He felt the mud of the garden soaking into his white shirt, the heat of the fire singeing his skin. He saw himself lunging for the gun, not as an architect, but as a shield. He saw Elias's face, wide with a terror that was worse than the bullet. He heard Leo's wail from the second-story window. The north wasn't a direction. It was a person. It was the two people currently standing in the room with him. The trauma of the shooting unlocked when Marcus realized the compass was his only tether to his son's future. Marcus dropped to his knees on the wooden floor of the Harlem apartment. The leather briefcase fell from his hand, the blueprints for the luxury Midtown Tower spilling out across the floorboards like discarded leaves. He was gasping for air, his dark skin slick with a sudden heavy sweat, his eyes finally, blessedly, wide with recognition. Elias was there in a second, his arms wrapping around Marcus from behind, pulling Marcus's head into the hollow of his neck. He held him with a strength that was both organic and unyielding. "I've got you, Marcus. I've got you," Elias sobbed, his locks draping over them both like a protective living canopy. The scent hit Marcus then, the rosemary oil, the deep animal musk, the faint, lingering wood smoke from the garden that still lived in the fibers of Elias's shirt. It wasn't interference anymore. It was the final element. The scent grounded the memories, turning the ghosts into a solid, heavy foundation. Marcus reached up and gripped Elias's forearms, his fingers digging into the linen. Marcus pulled back just enough to look at Elias. His deep-set dark eyes were no longer vacant or clinical. They were raw, bloodshot, and full of an agonizing, beautiful love that made his high cheekbones look even sharper. Your locks are messy," Marcus whispered, his voice a dry, gravelly rasp that sounded like it had traveled through miles of rubble to reach the surface. Elias let out a high, thin laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. They're always messy, you meticulous bastard. Marcus reached out, his hand trembling as he traced the line of Elias's jaw, feeling the warmth of his skin. I remember the bath. I remember the oxtail stew. I remember the way you look when you're trying to explain the stars to an engineer who only believes in math. He pulled Elias close again, burying his face in the organizer's shoulder, breathing him in. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you alone in the ruin. I thought I was protecting the structure, but I was just living in a grave. Leo joined the hug, his small arms barely reaching around both men. Marcus pulled his son into his lap, the three of them a single solid structure in the middle of the room. The apartment no longer felt like an architectural project. It felt like a sanctuary. I remember everything now, Leo, Marcus told the boy, kissing the top of his head. I remember the day you were born in my mind, and I'm never going back to that glass box. Not without you. Not without Elias. Marcus looked at the spilled blueprints for the Midtown Tower on the floor. He saw the helical staircase he had been designing, a cold, theoretical exercise in ego. He reached out, grabbed the paper, and crumpled it into a ball with a sound like a small, controlled demolition. We have work to do, Marcus said, looking at Elias with a resolve that was no longer corporate, but community-driven. The center. We break ground tomorrow, for real this time. We use the general's assets to build a legacy he could never understand. The next morning, Marcus returned to the office of Thorne and Associates, but he didn't walk in as the senior partner the board expected. He walked through the lobby in his charcoal suit, but he had a mustard yellow silk pocket square tucked into his breast pocket, a quiet, lethal signal to anyone watching. He met with Sloan and Aunt Viv in the executive conference room. The general's pension and his offshore accounts, Marcus said, his voice a cold, sharp blade. I want them liquidated into a permanent endowment for the Harlem Community Center. I want his name erased from every historical record and replaced with the children he tried to displace. I want his legacy to pay for every pepper plant and every book in that library. Sloan smirked, her blood-red nails tapping a rhythmic code on the glass table. Viv is already 3 steps ahead of you. We've leveraged the black files Silas provided to force a total divestment. The Sterling family estate in Virginia is being converted into a retreat for queer black youth. We're calling it the Sterling Correction. And Cynthia, she's currently signing a confession in exchange for keeping her remaining jewelry. The Harlem sun was a warm, golden blessing as the neighborhood gathered at the garden site. The charred timber and salted earth had been excavated and replaced with rich, dark, organic soil donated by a local cooperative. Neat stacks of fresh cedar beams and reinforced steel sat ready for the foundation. Mrs. Higgins was there, her bright pink umbrella twirling in the air like a celebratory flag. Mama Vance was there with a tray of fresh cornbread and jugs of ginger beer. The neighborhood teenagers were wearing Blueprint Series T-shirts Elias had designed, their faces full of a pride that no developer could buy. Marcus and Elias stood in the center of the mud, a heavy silver shovel between them. Marcus had removed his jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal his dark, powerful forearms. He was no longer the architect as a separate entity from the organizer. They were the foundation. On the count of 3, Elias grinned, his locks shimmering like gold in the sunlight. 1, 2, 3. Together, they pushed the silver blade into the dark Harlem earth. The sound of the shovel hitting the soil was the sound of a promise being kept to a dying man and a living son. The community erupted into a roar of cheers, a cacophony of loud joy that seemed to vibrate the very air. Marcus looked at Elias, and in front of the entire neighborhood, in front of the cameras and the kids and the elders, he pulled him close and kissed him. It was a deep, unyielding kiss that signaled the end of the Thorn-Sterling War and the beginning of a life built on rock. "Welcome home, architect," Elias whispered against his lips, his breath smelling of ginger and joy. Marcus smiled, a real, radiant smile that reached his deep-set eyes. He looked at Leo, who was already digging in the dirt with his own small trowel, and felt a peace that no skyscraper could provide. For the first time, Marcus Thorne wasn't calculating the fall. He was feeling the rise. The celebration was at its peak. The local jazz band had started to play a high-tempo, soulful track that had everyone dancing in the mud. Marcus was laughing, a sound that felt like it was finally healing his fractured ribs, as he watched Mrs. Higgins try to teach Leo how to two-step. But then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a Saturn transit or a military threat. It was a visual frequency that didn't belong in the garden. A man was walking through the crowd. He was a physical specimen, tall, with skin the color of toffee that seemed to glow from within. He was wearing an avant-garde, stylish outfit, a cropped, asymmetrical black vest that showcased a torso of rippling dancer's muscle, and high-waisted, wide-leg trousers that emphasized a powerful, rounded PHAT ass and long, athletic legs. He stalked the garden with a level of effortless, rhythmic grace that suggested a lifetime of professional dance. His hair was styled in a series of intricate sculptural twists, and he wore a single, oversized gold hoop in one ear. As he approached the center of the site, he didn't look at the community members, and he pointedly ignored Marcus. His eyes were locked on Elias with a look of intense, shared history. The man stopped 3 feet from Elias. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face, the smile of someone who had once owned the very thing Marcus had fought so hard to reclaim. "Elias," the man said, his voice a smooth, rich baritone that seemed to vibrate the ground more effectively than the music. "I heard you were building a sanctuary. I didn't think you had it in you after how we left things in the Bronx. You always were better at growing things than keeping them." Elias froze. His hand, which had been resting comfortably in Marcus's, went limp. The loud joy on his face didn't just fade, it evaporated, replaced by a complex, jagged mix of shock and an old, deep-seated pain that Marcus didn't have the blueprints for. Marcus stepped forward, his protective instincts redlining instantly. He placed a possessive hand on Elias's shoulder, his tall, tailored frame a sharp contrast to the dancer's fluid muscularity. Marcus looked the stranger in the eye, his architectural edge returning. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a dangerous low-frequency rumble. "And you are." The man finally looked at Marcus, his expression one of bored physical superiority. He didn't answer Marcus. He looked back at Elias, his gaze lingering on the locks. "Are you going to introduce us, Elias?" the man purred. "Or have you forgotten the man who taught you everything you know about soul? The man who saw you before the architect bought you a new life?" Elias swallowed hard, his throat working. He looked at Marcus, his warm brown eyes full of a sudden terrifying vulnerability. "Marcus," Elias whispered, his voice shaking. "This is Maurice. He's a lead dancer with the Dance Theater of Harlem, and he's my ex-boyfriend."